Welcome, everyone. We just wanted to start quickly with a review of Stop It Now's model and key strategies, just because I really want to focus on what we've highlighted in pink on your screen, emphasizing the importance of getting help. Our role is always to help folks move past barriers, their own shame, guilt, fear, and focus on protecting children and preventing a child from being harmed. So that means providing accurate and helpful information about finding help and support and sharing how reaching out can be a positive experience, and all the while planning for safety for everyone involved. We really believe here at Stop It Now that we have to reduce the isolation that comes along with this topic, that child sexual abuse thrives in isolation. And we know that by connecting with others and reaching out, we're taking steps to keeping children safe. We also really believe in the benefit of working with a professional, with folks who are trained in sexual behavior problems, who are experienced, and talking with people in compassionate and supportive ways. It's part of taking action.
Right, thanks, Jenny. And to help address questions like the one that you're seeing on your screen and so many more, I want to introduce you to our experts. Our two guest experts are both from the Namaste Center for Healing and the Prevention Project. The Prevention Project produces the Prevention Podcast, which shares interviews with minor attracted adults and other people who are working in the field of prevention. Candice Christiansen, the director of the Namaste Center, is the founder of several programs that specialize in treating a wide range of sexual issues, from infidelity, sex and porn addiction, general intimacy issues and trauma, to providing mental wellness support to adults with minor attractions. Her global program, The Prevention Project, has reached 50 countries, and her podcast, The Prevention Podcast, went viral in its first week of launching in January 2018. Meg Martinez-Dedamonte is the Assistant Clinical Director of the Namaste Center and the Prevention Project, and has worked closely with Candice with people who have engaged in problematic sexual behavior and those with minor attractions who have committed themselves to not offending. Meg currently oversees the outpatient and intensive programs at the Namaste Center and the Prevention Project, and is the lead facilitator of the project's several psychoeducational support groups. Welcome, Meg and Candice. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you guys so much for having us on your podcast on Monday.
Of course, we're so happy to be on, and we loved having you on our podcast as well.
Yes, Great, thank you. So I'd like to get started by asking you both, why is this conversation important to each of you? Why is it important that we talk about and with folks who are experiencing sexual attractions, feelings, and thoughts about children? Candice, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think a lot of people now know me from the podcast, but our prevention podcast, and know that I'm a survivor of horrific childhood sexual abuse. And so my lifelong mission and passion for this work is that let's prevent any more victims. And so it's so simple for me that the conversation has to start with that we want to support people who are about prevention. And what we're finding is that minor attracted people are about prevention. That's why they're reaching out. They do not want to harm anyone, especially minors, especially children. And so this conversation is essential, and we have to open those lines of communication for those reasons. Meg, what about for you?
So I came from a juvenile justice background and just noticed, and as you guys know, there's a lot of youth that realize as youth that they are attracted to minors, and they continue to be attracted to minors as they grow up. And so with me coming from that background in the juvenile system, that helping those kids as they become older and helping them to be aware of their attractions and to be curious about their sexuality and to manage their attractions ultimately is a huge passion of mine as well.
Yeah, thank you so much to you both, for that really, candid and, important response. I think we're all on the same page when we agree that, this is a really important part of prevention.
Absolutely.
Jenny.
Yes, there you go. Thanks, you guys. I was having a little tech problem. And, I do want to thank you as well, because I think both your personal and professional experience is so invaluable. And we know that we have to have as part of this discussion both survivors and adults who are at risk and who have abused. And all of us who have worked with, from young children through elders know that this is an issue really across the lifespan. So I really appreciate both of you being here. And now that we've learned a bit about your work and what brought you here, let's get into some of our questions. And this first one is kind of along the lines of educating the consumer, because I know that with the audience that we have, folks working with treatment already, and those working on behalf of both survivors and those youth and adults who may be at risk, this answer may be more obvious, but often on our helpline, we do hear from therapists who, when faced with their clients' disclosure of unwanted attractions, weren't sure what to do next, whether to keep treating them, whether to refer them on. And for further consideration, we know that the typical referral list that we often turn to, like ATSA's, the Association of Treatment of Sex Abusers, is a referral list of practitioners primarily working with adults who have already offended and involved with the court system. And so we're wanting to make sure that we give folks accurate information about who they should be looking for to help them in this journey. So what kind of professional should someone be looking for if they want help with their unwanted attraction to minors? And who, for lack of a better word, is the best kind of therapist for someone in this situation? What kind of experience should they have?
It's such that is such a loaded question. We actually had a conversation this morning about it because, you had mentioned ATSA, and I have so much respect for ATSA and the ATSA providers, which are the treatment providers for sexual abusers. And what I have learned in developing the prevention project is a lot of clinicians, no matter what their qualifications, have a lot of biases surrounding individuals who have minor attractions and no desire to offend. We get emails and responses almost daily from clinicians questioning, how can you treat pedophiles? They're automatic offenders, which we know is not necessarily true. And so when we ask what qualifications, you can be a licensed professional who has 20 years experience, and this is my response to your qualification question, being open-minded and having compassion for an individual that walks in your office just like any other person and says, help me, right? So it's that open mind. If you are a sex offender therapist, if you're a trauma therapist, if you're both, if you're an addictions therapist, being open-minded enough to look at your own biases, to get educated, to look at the research on pedophilia and what we know of individuals with minor attractions, which means we know that individuals with minor attractions are not automatically going to sexually offend. They're in our offices for a reason. They're asking for help. And so, Meg, do you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, like what Candace said earlier, the reality is there's not a certification, or it's not like you're looking for a certain set of letters behind a therapist's name to see if they are going to be a good fit for you. It's truly about getting to know the therapist. And I think that you might be talking about this a little bit on the next slide, but I would always tell an individual it's okay to interview a therapist. It's okay to say, hey, I'm thinking about getting help for some things and I'd like to interview you or do a consult call. And a lot of times those are free with therapists who want to just say, okay, I want to see if we're a good fit. And that's the reality, because there's not a certification for, I'm a MAP certified therapist. It just doesn't exist. And so for both the clinician and the client, it's about talking to each other and seeing, okay, is this going to be a good fit? Does the therapist have that compassionate, open-minded vibe? Are they being sensitive to these other questions that I'm asking about? Do they even have an understanding of what pedophilia is or what minor attraction is? Or do they automatically go to this stereotype of, MAPs are ticking time bombs, or they're all going to offend ultimately? And so I think whether you're asking this from a client perspective or a therapist perspective, just giving that time and space in the beginning to get to know each other is really key to understand, is this going to help me?
We interviewed a female on our podcast who shared that she went to her therapist after seeing her for a while and said, I need you to know I'm attracted to children. And the therapist automatically said, I don't treat sex offenders. So she got up to leave. And the therapist said, wait. And she said, I'm willing to talk more with you. And this woman, the female pedophile, said they actually are still working together because the therapist checked her biases at the door once the client got up and said, okay, well, that's not who I am. And so was willing to look at her own biases and get to know her client and be able to help her with compassion. We've heard other stories of clinicians who will say, I have worked through my biases. I have been open to getting educated. I've been open to looking at the research and working from a space of compassion in order to be able to help these folks, because what I'm learning is more and more individuals are coming to me. And if the clinician says I have a sex offender background, but more and more are coming to me saying I need help, I haven't offended, but can you help me from this compassionate space? And there are clinicians out there saying, yes, I'm willing to do that work with you from an unbiased and compassionate space. And so again, like Meg said, there isn't some special certification. I think this is really about having that compassion that we learn as clinicians when someone comes through our door saying, can you help me?
Oh, I think that's so helpful. And I fully agree, of course, about checking your biases. And I just want to acknowledge that it is hard, right? I mean, as somebody who's done this work myself for years, both with youth and now at Stop It Now, I catch myself sometimes in private life responding to some news article or something that a friend says, and just, without even thinking, can go into either a judgmental or punitive mind, and then have to pause and say, this isn't what I really believe or value. And so I don't think it's a process with an ending, that we have to be aware of our biases throughout our practice. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
we agree. Yep.
Great, thanks. Well, let's move on. There you go, Micah.
Yeah, so, I think that touches really well on, there isn't this one type of professional that we have to look for. We have to kind of ask questions, see how they're responding, see how they would work with an individual. And I just want to switch gears just a tiny bit, because we often hear from people who are worried that either something that they've thought about or perhaps have already done could get them reported. Although we rarely hear specific disclosures of contact sexual abuse, without seeking a disclosure, what we advise people asking this question, at least on the helpline, to say to a therapist they're interviewing is, if someone told you that they thought or did X, Y, and Z, then what would you feel like you have to do, as kind of a way to gauge whether this therapist felt he or she would be required to report. And unfortunately, we do know that there are therapists and providers out there that feel they need to report the disclosure of thoughts and feelings, but no actual abusive behavior. So I'm wondering, what do you think the best approach is for someone in this position? How do you think that people can ask for help, find out about the therapist's approach to reporting in a way that addresses the needs and requirements for, everyone involved?
So again, this is another kind of multifaceted question, but my first thought, Micah, is what are you reporting and what will come of that report? And so you really need to ask yourself that question, because when we talk about our duty to warn and our mandatory reporting laws as clinicians, it's around a behavior typically. If I'm going to report a behavior, who am I reporting it to? Is it DCFS or Child Protective Services? Is it to the police? And what am I reporting to them, and what's going to come of that? And so I think really linearly looking at that is really helpful for clinicians, because if you're under the impression that you believe you have to report a fantasy, really stop and think about what that will look like. Are you calling Child Protective Services and saying my client has a fantasy about minors, they don't have an identifiable victim, they haven't reported or disclosed any contact behaviors, and so Child Protective Services is going to say, okay, you know what I mean? There's not anything that can come of that. If clinicians think that they need to report something when they hear their clients talking about having fantasies or having thoughts or feelings towards minors, to me that's an indication that they need supervision or consultation. So yeah, if you're feeling uncomfortable with that as a clinician, by all means reach out to your supervisor or somebody that is in the field that can consult you in this area. Candace can probably speak to this, but she consults globally on this issue. It's not necessarily something you need to get law enforcement involved with.
Unless there's an identifiable victim and there's been contact. We know in some states, I think there's a few states now, that if someone discloses that they're viewing child pornography, it is reportable. We know California, I think Pennsylvania, there's another one. And so there are, for clinicians, they need to know their reporting requirements. But for a client calling in, or an individual calling a therapist, I think it is okay to say, give that hypothetical and see what the clinician says. And then I love how Meg said, for the clinician, if you're not comfortable working with this individual, refer them, be honest about it. And if you want to but need consultation, seek consultation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would agree completely on that point. And something else that we had just heard from one of the individuals who contacted us, one of our contacts who is a non-offending pedophile, he also said to look for, even like nonverbal things. So when someone's giving you an answer, also look for nonverbal body cues, like how someone's sitting or what their face is doing. So even if they're giving all the right answers, there might be some other cues in there that this might not be the right fit, or this might not be, the best, person to go with. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I just have another because I think then you're talking from that client perspective, which I think is wonderful. And as a clinician, I think it's important for us to be open with the client and truly say, what you just told me is concerning, and I'm not sure what I have to do with it. Because we've had clients come to us before who have worked with clinicians for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden the clinician says, I talked to a supervisor and what you told me 6 sessions ago actually needs to be reported in our state. And that's really devastating for the client.
Yeah.
And so I think that from a clinical perspective, instead of shifting and crawling out of your skin, but giving them this, no, you're safe here answer, I think you should say, what you just told me is actually concerning. I'm going to be honest. And as a mandatory reporter, I just want to check with my supervisors or with my colleagues to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I really don't want to give you an impression one way or another. And that's important. That's important for the therapeutic relationship and for the safety of clients, for the safety of your licenses. It's just, yeah.
Well, and then I think if there's something that ends up having to be reported, doing it with the client so that they feel like they're a part of it. Or at least, having that conversation so you maintain that trust. But we have yet to have to report someone that's had contact that's come in as a non-offending minor attracted individual. So again, I think, there's a lot more that goes into it, I think, and we have to be aware of our own biases and assumptions around reporting too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I moved us ahead to the next slide because it's a little bit repetitive, but while we're really focused on this, we have folks, as you guys do, who reach out to our helpline and know that if they don't reach out for help, they may cross a line and could be arrested. And that fear of arrest eventually outweighs their fear of finding help. But then on the other side, we also know there are minor attracted individuals who feel at no risk of abusing, who would like to work with a therapist, but they may fear that if they disclose this part of themselves, they could still be reported, especially if they're a parent or work with children. And this contact that Micah mentioned, non-contact pedophile who's worked with us, shared these thoughts that one somewhat cynical way to look at it from the therapist's perspective is that you can make 2 kinds of mistakes. One is to not report when there's abuse going on, and this can lead to lots of bad publicity at maybe at the least, and conceivably folks can lose their licenses or there can be criminal proceedings. And the other is to report some pedophile who's no danger to anybody. His life may be ruined, but no one is going to come after you. It's hard to imagine a pedophile winning a lawsuit against anybody. And for an awful lot of people, therapist or not, a pedophile's life is worth nothing. And ruining it is no cause for regret, even if he was no danger to anybody. And then he added, hopefully most therapists don't actually think like that, but some do, and there are many documented horror stories. And again, I'm sure we've all heard that fear. And so while I know that we've really digging into this, but I'm wondering, you know, that I think that duty to warn is really gray sometimes, and I really appreciate the emphasis on talking with supervisors and peer groups. And do you think that there's anything else that a therapist might recommend based solely on the disclosure of being MAP attracted? So, you know, what else could a therapist who is hearing that somebody is minor attracted and that they are concerned that they're going to cross a boundary somewhere, and at the same time they're afraid that if they tell someone that, they are going to lose their job or their children are going to be taken away? You know, what can we tell these folks to help encourage them to still be able to reach out for help?
I had a lot of thoughts coming into my mind when you were talking, Jenny, but the first thing that's kind of funny for Candace and I is we have our licensing department basically on speed dial. So we call them anytime we have a question, and we can give them hypothetical, situations and just kind of see what they have to say, which I think is just good practice with anything as a clinician, so that you kind of know where you're working within. And so that was in addition to what like a clinician can do if they're feeling worried, just to show that there's due diligence done. Like, hey, I spoke to a supervisor, I checked out my laws, I checked out my licensing board, I checked out my ethical requirements, because not treating someone who's asking for help and not breaking the law is against an ethical requirement too. You could be doing a lot of harm to that clinician, as your contact said. And so I just think as clinicians, we can't ask for help or ask questions enough. Just like you said, and I'm not going to say this quote verbatim, but that isolation is the worst counselor. Isolation is also the worst consultant or supervisor too. It's not good for therapists to practice in isolation. And so we can't emphasize that enough.
One of the things I want to add is, if for clinicians that are listening today, that, gathering as much information as you can from the client, and then say, let's create a safety plan. If you are, if you're worried about your risk, let's look at creating a safety plan to keep you safe, because this is to support you and those around you, and I care about you enough to support you in your request to remain safe, especially if you're worried about risk. So I think the safety plan piece is important. And, let's get you, if it's an individual therapy, or, if you're in individual therapy, let's get you a group. At the Prevention Project, we have global call-in groups, especially for minor attracted persons who are non-offending. Let's add on that support. If it's an individual who's ended up getting legally involved, we have a group for that. We have all this support, and we're one of others. You guys stop it now before you act. There's a group ed. There's more and more support out there. And so clinically, you could say, gosh, I know we're doing work once a week for 50 minutes. Why don't we add on some support? And here are the ways we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, okay. So helpful. Thank you. And I am just really happy to hear about the online group as well. It's, one of the things we didn't really include in preparing, but was in the back of our head, is just a logistical question for so many people about, where do I find somebody? I mean, folks in really rural areas, folks without insurance, without a lot of finance, having the finances. It's sometimes really, it's hard to hear about people reaching out for help or willing to reach out for help, but not able to find anybody who will work with them. So these kinds of resources are just so important to us.
We agree.
Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit though about the type of counseling. I hear really clearly that, and I've believed this a long time myself as a clinician, that there's so much more that goes into our practice than just our experience and the models that we use. I mean, we bring ourselves into this, but we know that there is specific models of treatment to help minor attracted folks. So, is treatment different first? Is it different for people who have abused and who are struggling with sexual behaviors than for minor attracted adults who haven't abused and feel more in control, more, I guess in control is okay to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely see an overlap. As Candace talked about, we have a group for minor attracted individuals, and then we have a group for folks that are legally involved. And there's some MAPS in the legally involved group, and there's some people in the MAPS group that have a past offense. And so we definitely sometimes see them overlap. This is pretty obvious, but not everyone who offends is a MAP. And so we do understand that. But if there is a MAP that has offended, then we want to address that offending behavior. However, which does look like sexual offender treatment at times. However, if we have MAPs that are just reaching out and, like you said, are feeling really in control of their behavior, but there are other things in their life that are causing them distress, like the fact that they fantasize or the fact that they look at maybe legal images that are like cartoons, or the fact that they can't talk to anybody about this, then we definitely treat that. We treat the isolation, we treat the depression, we treat the anxiety, we treat the suicidality. When we talk about it in our MAPS group, we also look at it from a biopsychosocial perspective, and each member gets to kind of see where their attractions fall. They're able to say, I feel like this is a biological underpinning for me. It's my sexual attraction or sexual orientation, and that's what feels the most right for me, where a lot of clients are able to pinpoint traumatic experiences that have caused, arrested development, for lack of a better phrase, and help and attributed to that attraction. And when they are able to do their trauma work and kind of uncouple those events, a lot of them see a decrease in the sexualization of children, where that attraction and that emotional attraction is always there. They no longer struggle with immediately going into like sexual fantasy or having it be distressing in that way because they're objectifying a child. So breaking it down on an individual level is really, really important. And then, finally, just understanding the social and cultural ways that their attraction has been impacted. And we just find that breaking it down that way and noticing that it's going to be individualized for people is really, really helpful and effective.
I'll add to that. I love ATSA and the listserv. It gets very passionate at times, and there was some discussion about it. I will just clearly say treatment is absolutely different for someone who's abused someone than someone who is not. If we look at risk, need, and responsivity principles that guide our criminal justice system when we are looking at accurate treatment interventions, it makes no sense to put someone who has not committed a sex offense in the same treatment or level or type of treatment with a sex offender. That individual is going to be at risk. And so, we work with many individuals who have minor attractions, many who have autism spectrum as well. And that's been something I've been looking into to see is there a correlation. Many have trauma, many have other issues, and they have not offended against anyone. And so why would we put them in the same treatment as a rapist or a child molester? That is going to traumatize that individual who needs a different form of treatment. Am I saying that sex offenders don't need trauma therapy? Nope, I'm not saying that. I am saying that treatment is absolutely different.
Right. And it makes me actually want to pause for a second and even speak to our audience, because some of the feedback we got from our last webinar was, I want to hear more about treatment for sex offenders. And I think this is a good plug we're really focused on prevention. And we're talking about how to create conditions that really are comfortable and make sense for people before a child has been harmed, so that they can reach out for support, that they can reach out for whatever's going on in their life, and have somebody meet them in that place without making that jump to, oh, because you have this attraction, you therefore need to be in this group with people who have offended. That,
Exactly.
so I think that's really important for us all to take in. And I bet you it won't surprise you that we have answered so many calls and letters from adults looking for relief from their attraction. And they ask, isn't there a pill I can take? And
Yep.
literally, can I get castrated? I've been
Oh,
amazed to the degree people are
yeah.
willing to ask for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and what do you say? I mean, just because I have a feeling we're not the only folks that are hearing that. So when
Yeah.
you hear an adult who's desperate to be a safe adult say, isn't there some sort of surgical procedure or pill? What should we say to that person?
Mhm. Well, first, no, I mean, you can, okay, so we could say, okay, so let's say you cut off your penis, for instance, right? I mean, or for a woman, you close off your vagina, you have it surgically closed off. Will that change your attraction? Right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the issue is not your body part. I mean, this is something that we want to look at. And like Meg said, there is research. I do court evaluations, and I just finished one where I had to, present to the court research on pedophilia, and showing that there's research now that does show biological underpinnings. There's research out there that shows certain brain tumors in parts of the brain can actually cause pedophilic interest. And so, there's so many more factors that come into play when we're talking about attraction. Trauma, we talked about that. We have so many men and women who say, I have this traumatic event when I was a certain age, and I found that I'm attracted. And we go back and we treat that. Yes, like Meg said, their sexual attraction changes, the emotional part maybe doesn't. There's so much that goes into it that I think it's not as simple as let's just cut off or close off a body part.
Hmm.
We can validate the person for their suffering and their struggle. Our goal with our MAPS population is let's find a way to improve your quality of life. Let's find a way in the most relative sense of normalcy to help you live a normal life, because you deserve that with your attraction.
Great. Great. And we're just gonna dig one step deeper on this, but so just in general, for someone who is minor attracted, who has very, very clear boundaries, really accepts responsibility for safety of children and themselves, do you even think that, do we want to say to that person, oh, you still need to see a counselor? Or if they're in counseling for something completely different, relationship issues, job issues, just other general anxiety, and maybe depression, do folks have to come out, if you will? Do you think that it serves them well to disclose this part of themselves, or can they focus on healing whatever they're healing and working on without having that come into the room?
So this is a really good question, and we were both kind of like shaking and nodding our heads at the same time. Um, but one of the things that we notice in working with our maps is that there are a lot of things that are really interconnected. So, for example, we actually have multiple members of our maps group that are also trans, and so when they talk about their trans orientation or identity, they also talk about the minor attraction. They like find that they're linked in some ways. Some people realize that there's really strong ties between those two things. So if they're struggling in one area, it's inevitable that the other one arises. Or a lot of times we get individuals that are coming in to work on relationship issues or healthy sex with a same age partner, and then we realize, okay, there's this attraction that you've never talked about that's contributing to this distress. And so that's the key for us, is if for any reason there's distress that's coming from the way that the minor attraction is manifesting, then yeah, it's important for you to seek help from a professional to discuss that. And what we always tell our group is that you're more than your attraction. And so even though they come to a group that's called a minor attracted persons group, we don't sit there and talk about their minor attraction the whole time. Like Candace said, we're committed to helping them manage that and increase their quality of life. And so on the flip side, if somebody's in therapy for, workaholism and work stress, and they never notice that their minor attraction has caused any distress in their life, and they're feeling safe and content, for lack of a better word, with the boundaries they've put around their attractions, why would it ever come up? You know what I mean?
Right.
What I would again say is, if they're looking on your website, if they're looking on our website, if they're exploring this, there's probably a reason why, and it doesn't hurt to explore the option of getting professional help or treatment around that attraction.
Well, and part of the reason why someone might want to reach out for support in like our MAPS group is because they've been isolated, because the media has made it so the word pedophilia equals sex offender. And so many people that we've talked with who are non-offending pedophiles, both males and females, will say the global community thinks I'm a monster because of this label, just the label. And so just having that support with other people who can say, I'm in the same boat, can be so helpful. I will say, in talking with folks that have pedophilia, who say, I am safe, I'm not at risk, you ask the question of, is it, I'll use my own words, more of a burden basically, or troublesome for them to say that they're a pedophile to the therapist? Potentially, yes. And so that's just a sad reality, because there's so much bias even among clinicians about what that term means. Even if the individual is safe and they have no desire to offend, I hear all the time from clinicians that say they're lying. If someone's a pedophile and they claim they're non-offending, they're a liar. And I go toe to toe with therapists that work with juvenile sex offenders, adult sex offenders, so on and so forth, who have such bias that sadly it is. If you are safe, I get why you would not share with a therapist that you have that orientation. I get why you wouldn't. And I will say, I think that's okay because of the stigma. My prayer is, if we come at it from a sexual age orientation standpoint, and that is one part of you, my hope is that that is something as part of who you are that you can bring into your therapy, even if you're there to work on depression, suicidality, and relationships. And the final thing I'll say is, a lot of times individuals with minor attractions are ending up in therapy even though they're safe, because the stigma around their attraction is killing them. The stigma, not their risk, the stigma.
Right. And I certainly imagine, and just as a big believer, that we all need to show up authentically in life to the best of our ability, that not being able to share this part of you, it really then disallows you that space, that you can never be 100% who you are and for real and show up.
Yeah. We see that all the time.
Yeah, that's sad. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I think I would totally, speak to that too. That's often what we hear on the phone, is the presenting need almost feels more like, I'm so depressed, I can't go on anymore. And the underlying issue is that they're minor attracted and they've kept this to themselves for so long, and all they see on the news and the media is really that, that they're a sex abuser, they're gonna abuse children, they're not worth anything. And so really, it's almost like that's the underlying second problem, but really it's not their presenting need. They're coming in as talking to us being depressed and feeling suicidal, just from this weight on their shoulders.
Yes. Ethically, and what I tell people all the time is, ethically, we have an obligation to treat someone who's suicidal and depressed. Especially if they come and say, I want to kill myself. if someone just walks in and they say, I want to kill myself, and then someone walks in and says, I want to kill myself, but by the way, I'm a pedophile and I'm committed to not harming anyone, in my world, I'm going to treat both of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know we touched on this just a little bit. You talked a little bit about some online programs, and Jenny was talking a little bit about, people who may either live in a rural area who doesn't have access to specialists, let alone just a general counselor, and some people who just don't want to meet someone face to face. They've had a bad experience in therapy previously. They're just not ready for that step. We always encourage someone to reach out face to face, but sometimes that's just not going to be an option, right? I'm wondering if you can kind of expound a little bit on what you were talking about before about some online supports, some self-help supports, and whether you think these are kind of another effective tool within, someone's personal toolbox of having a support network.
I think self-help is a great supplemental support, for instance, like Verp Ed for folks who are listening clinically. You can tell your clients who are minor attracted. Verp Ed is well known. We know the creators of Verp Ed. We respect them. They're committed to keeping our community safe and offering support to MAPS. And so I believe that, yes, I think Verp Ed, for instance, is a great support. We have our MAPS support group. It's very, very affordable. We allow folks that are so scared and just want to try the first one to call in for free just to see. They can use an alias if they want or need to. We just want to be there for support. I have 2 clinicians that oversee that support group. It's a psychoeducational support group that's global, that is a support to folks, because I have individuals who will reach out to us that say, hey, is this peer support? Because I really would like it to be more something that has oversight by a clinician. Mm-hmm. And so we have found that folks really appreciate having peer support. They benefit from that, as well as having clinical support in an online web-based forum. I will say there is a need for a female-only anti-contact non-offending pedophile group. We have had a challenge getting one up and running. I think female pedophiles, sadly, they're out there, but they're on the periphery. There's not research on female pedophiles. We've interviewed 2 on our podcast, and we know there's a need for that support, because female pedophiles will say, sometimes if I go on to like Verp Ed, for instance, it feels very male heavy. And so I do think there needs to be more support for female pedophiles. And then I also think there needs to be more support for partners of MAPS. And so we've started a partner support group for partners of MAPS as well, and it's global and it's online, because there just isn't any. So I do think self-help support, peer support, as well as clinical support is beneficial.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And, we on the helpline have heard from, some female minor attracted persons as well. And, no doubt everyone I've talked to has always been like, am I the only one? Are there more, females out there who also call in and talk about this kind of thing? Because I feel like even more isolated. They know that there are other people out there with minor attractions, but it's very rare, I think, for them to have a place to connect. So I feel like that is really much needed work. And I'm wondering, for the people out there who don't know, can you do a little plug about where people can find these groups online?
Okay.
Specifically your group?
Okay, so I just want to point out that our group is co-ed. Just so that people that are listening know, our group is co-ed. So right now there are males and females and non-binary individuals and trans individuals in the group. It's just, for everybody. Yeah, for everybody. And so our website is thepreventionproject.org. We do have a MAPS tab on that website, so that viewers or listeners can go read more about our support group. As Candace said, most people reach out to us several times before joining. They may be really nervous about joining. We let them a lot of times join the first group for free with an alias so that they can kind of see what it's like. Probably similar to you guys, we get them calling us and asking questions and whatnot before they actually commit to enroll or join. And most people that do enroll and join stay for a fairly long time and enjoy and appreciate the support for a variety of reasons. Candace and I actually just wrote a chapter for a book that's coming out in the UK that's on global prevention projects, and so we did list a bunch of online and peer support groups for prevention-seeking individuals as well as people who are anti-contact non-offending, and so we have that coming out, and maybe I don't know if we could let you guys know when that comes out, because it's really a thorough, detailed list of global prevention projects. But like VERPED, you just Google VERPED, you get to them. We refer people to you guys a lot for support or additional support. Before You Act is an amazing program. There's a lot of different things going on in the UK, which is really awesome. And so most people just say they Googled help for minor attracted individuals or something like that, and that's how they find us. So,
and Twitter.
Yes.
Our Twitter handle is @prevention, INTVN, which is just the abbreviated intervention, but Candace at thepreventionproject.org, Meg at thepreventionproject.org. People can email us directly if they want to know about our groups as well.
Great, thanks so much. And just the last question that we have for you guys is, what about people who are kind of looking to expand their support network? Maybe they have a close friend or a relative, a significant other they like the support of. They want someone that they can really lean on in real life. What kind of suggestions would you have to help someone make this sort of connection with a person who's already in their life?
I would definitely get support from, that's where I think a peer support group or your support for people to understand if you're working with a therapist to prepare you for that. We have had minor attracted individuals who are non-offending in our program who have gotten in relationships. We had successful marriages as a result, where they come in and we actually support them in the process of sharing that information, preparing, because it can be so scary. I wish there was a really easy, quick answer to that. But what I would say just first and foremost is, before you say something to someone, a parent, a loved one, a partner, I would get support from your peer support group, or if you're in, say, our MAPS group, or you've contacted your helpline, get support first so you have some sort of guidance, because it can go sideways really, really fast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You guys brought up something. I know, Mike, you said final question, but we have a little extra time, and we didn't really think about including in this, because it's clearly a whole other month of training, but about youth who are identifying for themselves this attraction. And, I feel like they have even more of a risk if they reach out and talk to somebody. And I know that there's some great work, a Help Wanted project, lots of other research on, how can we create a pathway for these kids. This is the basic of primary prevention, is helping kids find a safe place who are wanting to, at a young age, take responsibility for what they're recognizing is an attraction that just, isn't going to be safe in the long run if they're not able to, to just do some work with it and to come to some place of safety for themselves. And, what can we tell, I guess, therapists who are working with youth when a youth does disclose that this is, or how can we create an environment for youth to more comfortably disclose? Very similar to adults, but I know there's some differences, because youth don't always have the same sort of choices or the same sort of ability to seek out safe resources for themselves.
Right. Jenny, this is actually where a lot of my passion grew out of, because I worked with juveniles who were in secure care facilities for offending that talked about how this is who I'm attracted to. I mean, there was a minority of them who knew that they were pedophiles when they were 15, 16, 17, which I guess is an interesting construct, but knowing that, I don't think that we should ignore them. I don't think we should ignore them, and I think we should take it seriously. And like you were saying, the difference between the adults and the children is that we do need to get parents and caregivers involved in understanding, like, this is something that your child is dealing with or going through, and here's the safety measures we need in place, or here's what they need in order to feel safe or heard or understood. And so that really wraparound support of the juvenile or the youth, I think, is so important that we might not have to provide for an adult. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the dangers of isolation, and I think this speaks really true for the case of teenagers. And so we have to be very sure and very aware of their isolation, and how can we bring them support for what they're noticing. I mean, I love how you said this is the epitome of primary prevention, and we should treat it as such.
I think we are in a bit of a conundrum with it, because parents with minors have to be involved. And so I get emails from teens, and then our global, other global like people in the prevention community who say, Candace, what do we do with this population? We're all kind of stumped, because if I have a teen reach out to me, can I respond to the teen about their attraction and treatment if they're a minor? I think that's the struggle and so I know that folks listening who have reached out to me via email, who, like, clinicians and then other folks in the community, have said, Candace, do you have a solution for this? I don't have an easy solution for it unless they're in the system, sadly. When you have teens reaching out saying, how do I get help for this? I'm stumped, because I would love to have that conversation globally. I would love to have a teen support group for minors who are minor attracted, who have attraction to children. I think that is a very large global conversation. I think it's a huge conversation that's yet to be had, that needs to be had. So I wish I had an easy answer for that one too. Do we need to offer that support? Yes, but I think there's a lot of us in the prevention world who are just stumped as to what to do, especially when we have parents who may say, what are you talking about? No, this isn't my kid. It's a phase. They'll grow out of it. They're gay. They're not a pedophile. I just think that's right there is the barrier. My hope is to create a gateway, but right now that feels like a barrier.
Well, we actually have an excellent question in the chat that I think is part of that gateway, about what advice would we have then for parents, for loved ones who know about an adult or a juvenile, and as we're focusing right now for the moment on youth, what can we say to those folks who love somebody who is minor attracted?
I mean, the same thing that we would say to someone who loves a minor attracted adult. When we work with the partners, it's let's educate them on what's going on. Let's educate them on the fact that they have this attraction doesn't make them an offender or doesn't make them a ticking time bomb. And I think that that's just where we start. A lot of parents might give some of the excuses Candace mentioned because they don't understand. And it's scary because the word pedophile is scary to them and they don't want to see that in their child. But I think that it does help to use the language minor attracted, and it does help to talk about it in terms of age orientation. It does help to start to break it down. What is the biological, the psychological, and the social components of this person's attraction? And that can all be, discussed and unraveled with a clinician. Like Candace said, though, there's no quick, cut, dry, easy answer for a general, question.
What can a parent say or a loved one say if they find out? Okay, parent, if you're listening to me, do you love your child? Do you love your partner? Can you check your bias at the door just for a minute and hear them out? Can you just check your bias at the door? Can you love them unconditionally as they share this with you? We have too many teens killing themselves because they have an attraction to a child and they have no one to talk to. Do you want your child alive? Be open to what your child has to say. This is something that can be talked about. We need to do it with unconditional love and support and compassion. That's the biggest thing I would want to say.
Thank you. And we certainly are 100% behind you and in agreement. And we're coming to a close, and you've mentioned most of the organizations that we're putting up now, ATSA, who we certainly work with and love, and VERPED as well. Before You Act, a wonderful resource. Cure Sort, also strongly recommend folks check out their website for help, and particularly great resources, Wayne, over there, who can talk to any adult considering turning themselves in if that seems to be the course, to help them and what to expect. And Wayne's been through that process. We actually had one final question that I saw in the chat about looking for groups like the ones you guys are offering in South Africa. And, you know, I want to point out that the Prevention Projects groups are available globally electronically. So please check out their website. I don't know if any of us know specifically if there's any groups out in South Africa.
There aren't, but we've had folks call in from South Africa, Mauritius, Australia, England, Ireland, I mean, all over the globe into our group. So if someone needs a group in South Africa, have them call us. You can call in.
Yep. Great. I think that's good for people to know. It's good for us to know. I'm sure that we all actually take calls here, and so that just, it's like, yay, check, I can check that off. This information. Great. Well, I think we're just about at the end. I mean, if anybody, we do have a couple of moments if there's any questions, so we'll